reconcile the stupidities of the city.
Callaghan's 3 years at the Treasury were dominated by the constant need to reassure the money markets in an increasingly desperate battle to prevent devaluation.
The forward market is quite erratic today, so chaotic conditions.
But in November 1967, the city suddenly learnt that the Treasury had run out of treasure to defend the pound. Labour had been forced to devalue.
Police reinforcements are drafted into Downing Street tonight as the crowd outside number 10 built up to about 300. The entry was barred by police. There were boos as the Chancellor, Mr. Callaghan, left his home next door.
Mr. Callaghan, BBC and ITN, hearing you say...
Why would it not have been wiser to have a carefully planned devaluation in the course of the last 3 years at a well-chosen moment, as a great many economists favoured?
This was a well-chosen moment, and it was a carefully planned devaluation.
Surely forced on you at the last minute.
No, certainly not. I've said this before. I don't know why you repeat the question. Don't you believe me?
Treasury, I think, never quite really recovered its poise after that devaluation, because it was in the worst possible conditions it had been forced upon them. And a great deal of their pride, too, professional pride, went into holding the rate, because it was seen as a defeat for the UK. And I don't think the Treasury entirely recovered its confidence after that.
Devaluation had been another awful Treasury orgy, costing hundreds of millions. Inside the Treasury, officials lived in conscientious austerity. The problem in the salad bar was how to cope with inflationary rises in the cost of raw materials without depressing the level of demand in their unsubsidised canteen. And when the Conservative government imposed a 3-day week to conserve fuel during the 1974 miners' strike, Treasury officials worked on in candlelight, feeling it was their duty to set the nation a good example. When the Tories lost the election and Labour's Dennis Healey took over the Treasury, he inherited a country that seemed to be heading fast towards bankruptcy. Inflation was running at 30%, and public spending seemed out of control. For most of Healey's time as Chancellor, Jim Callaghan was Prime Minister. The two men were determined to present a brave face to the world as the Treasury once again battled to maintain the value of the pound.
We're now in a better position to achieve our economic miracle than any time since the war.
Do you think that the pound is now basically out of trouble?
My own view is it will settle at a rate which will hold for quite a long time.
2 months after that interview, Healey set off from the Treasury to fly to an international meeting of finance ministers. But on his way to Heathrow Airport, he heard on the car radio that the pound was plummeting on the foreign exchanges.
The only time I was really shaken as a minister was that famous day when the pound collapsed and I had to turn back from the airport to deal with it rather than go on to the Philippines, where I'd have been out of touch with Whitehall for 17 critical hours. And I felt the world was collapsing round me.
To bail Britain out, the Treasury applied for a massive loan from the International Monetary Fund, and Healey drove up to Blackpool to confront his sceptical party.
I'm going to negotiate with the IMF on the basis of our existing policies. But when I say existing policies, I mean things we don't like as well as things we do like. It means sticking to the very painful cuts in public expenditure on which the government's already decided. That's what it means, and that's what I'm asking for. That's what I'm going to negotiate for, and I ask the conference to support me in that task.
It was absolutely terrible for the Chancellor. We did actually look into the abyss. We had to raise a loan from the IMF, and we had to set about getting the economy into a state where we were more or less creditworthy in pretty short order. So there were very long nights worked and some desperately difficult politics. No joke having a foreign mission turn up in your country to tell you how to run it.
The men from the IMF went through the Treasury's books, and they demanded slashing cuts in Britain's public spending as the price of their multi-billion-dollar loan to Britain.
Dennis Healey negotiated with the IMF. He went much further than his brief that I'd given him. He once threatened the negotiators that if they didn't agree on what it was he was ready to go for, which he and I had discussed, then we would have a general election. He got no authority to say that. And I was staying in Leeds that night. He came up to his constituency, which of course is Leeds. He told me, he said, we're going to have a general election. I said, oh, thank you very much. But I didn't mind because I knew it was a negotiating tactic.
The proof of the pudding is in the eating, isn't it?
And what was the proof of the pudding in this case?
Well, they dropped the demand for the extra billion. We got the deal through.
Treasury was very battered, very, very battered after the IMF deal was struck. The senior civil servants had been through every sterling crisis, but this was worse than anything.
Going to the IMF was a dispiriting and humiliating experience for the Treasury. I mean, in the end, the Treasury's stock in trade is meant to be management of the domestic economy. And here was having to bring in somebody else to do it for them. I mean, it's like, you run a butcher's shop, and you need someone else to come in and chop up the cow.